My house had always been my retreat. It wasn't perfect, but it was all mine. A fresh chapter after leaving behind a draining marriage. After long shifts at work, it was my escape, where I could finally relax, shut out the chaos, and breathe. That night, however, my sanctuary felt anything but safe. I was beyond exhausted by the time I pulled into my driveway. I grabbed my bag, fished out my keys, and headed for the front door. But when I slid my key into the lock, it wouldn't turn. At first, I thought I was just tired, maybe using the wrong key. I tried again, jiggling it gently, then more forcefully. Nothing. Frustrated, I stepped back and stared at the door. Could the lock have jammed? I didn't remember it sticking before. After a few more failed attempts, I gave up and called a locksmith. He arrived quickly with a friendly demeanor. After fiddling with the lock, he explained it had likely just worn out and replaced it with a shiny new one. "Shouldn't give you any trouble now," he said. At the time, it didn't seem like something to worry about. Things break, right? Life happens. But looking back, that moment was the first crack in what I thought was an ordinary problem. 3 nights later, I found myself in the exact same situation. It had been another late shift, and all I wanted was to collapse into bed. But as I slid my key into the lock, it refused to budge. The new lock, the lock that shouldn't have given me trouble, I just had it replaced. How could it jam again so soon? Everything looked normal, but something didn't feel right. Reluctantly, I called the locksmith again. It was a different guy this time, gruff and not as chatty. As he worked, I asked if it was common for new locks to fail. He shrugged and muttered something about cheap materials, but I could tell he wasn't convinced either. When he left, I double-checked every window and door in the house, making sure they were locked tight. My mind kept wandering back to the door, the lock, and the thought that maybe someone had tampered with it. By the time the weekend rolled around, the feeling of paranoia hadn't let up. It wasn't like me. I was usually calm and logical, but the thought of someone messing with my locks gnawed at me. On a whim, I decided to install a small security camera above the front door. It wasn't much, just a cheap model I'd picked up online, but it gave me peace of mind. If someone was messing with my door, I'd catch them in the act. The first few nights, nothing happened. I'd come home, check the footage, and see only the empty porch. It was almost enough to make me feel silly for worrying. On the 4th night, everything changed. I came home from work, my shoulders heavy with exhaustion. My key slid into the lock, and to my relief, it turned smoothly for the first time in days. I felt a little lighter, but when I checked the camera footage later that evening, my heart dropped. At 2:13 a.m., the screen showed a man in a hooded sweatshirt standing on my porch. He wasn't facing the camera, but I could see his hands working on the lock, moving with a practiced ease. My throat tightened as I watched him remove the cylinder. When he was done, he turned and entered the house like he owned the place. For the next 3 hours, the footage showed nothing but darkness. Then, at 5:26 a.m., the man reappeared. He exited the house, replaced the cylinder, looked around, and disappeared into the night. I sat there staring at the screen, the weight of what I'd just seen crashing down on me. He'd been inside while I was gone for hours. My first instinct was to grab my phone and call the police, but I hesitated. What would I even say? That someone had broken in, but nothing was stolen? That I didn't know who he was or what he wanted? My hands trembled as I dialed anyway. The officer who arrived was kind. He watched the footage and asked me a string of questions. Did I recognize the man? Had I noticed anything missing? Had I seen any suspicious activity in the neighborhood? No, I replied each time. We'll file a report and increase patrols in the area, he said. In the meantime, I suggest staying with a friend or family member until we figure this out. I decided to take his advice. I packed a bag and drove to my sister's house, but sleep was impossible. My mind raced with questions, theories, and fears. Who was he? Why had he been in my house? The answers came the next day when the officer called me back. His tone was serious, almost cautious. We were able to access footage from the neighborhood surveillance cameras, he began. We saw the man getting out of a white car 2 blocks from your house. He was carrying tools, a small bag, and walked directly toward your property. A sinking feeling gripped my stomach as I listened. The footage gave us a clear view of the car's license plate. We traced it back to the registered owner, the officer continued. He paused for a moment and then he said the man's name. I couldn't even process the words at first. It was my ex-husband, the man who had refused to accept our divorce, who clung to the belief that we were destined to be together despite everything. My mind raced as fragments of old arguments and his obsessive behavior came flooding back. We believe he changed the locks as a way to manipulate your access to the house. It's not uncommon in cases like this. Hearing that he'd been so close, walking through my neighborhood and inside my home, it all made me feel sick. The police assured me they'd taken him in for questioning and that I should consider filing for a restraining order. They emphasized the importance of improving my home security immediately. I didn't hesitate. The next day, I had a professional security company install high-grade deadbolts, motion sensors, and cameras throughout the house. I changed my work shifts and made sure to let my closest friends know what was happening. But despite the precautions, every corner of my home felt violated, the walls holding secrets I didn't want to know. Eventually, I moved to a new place, my address shared only with a select few. But the fear hasn't fully left me. The sight of a white car still makes my heart race, and I catch myself triple-checking locks, even in broad daylight. If I've learned one thing from all of this, it's that ignoring small, strange signs can have big consequences. Sometimes those signs are the only warnings you'll get. I'd been renting that small house for about 6 months. It wasn't much, but it was perfect for me, a quiet place to focus on my graduate studies. The backyard was small, bordered by a tall wooden fence that separated it from the parking lot of a nearby supermarket. I liked the ambient sound of the cars or shopping carts behind the fence. It was just enough to remind me I wasn't completely isolated, but private enough to feel like my own little world. Most evenings I worked late into the night on my thesis, enjoying the silence. That evening was no different. I'd been glued to my laptop for hours, papers and coffee mugs scattered across the kitchen table. The only sound was the rhythmic tapping of my keyboard until it all stopped. The power went out so abruptly that for a second I thought I'd blown a fuse. My laptop screen became the only light, plunging the rest of the house into silence and darkness. I sat there for a moment, waiting for the power to come back, but the house remained eerily still. Grabbing my phone, I turned on the flashlight and got up. The beam of light swept across the unsettling dark walls. I'd dealt with power outages before, but this one felt different. It wasn't stormy, and I hadn't overloaded any circuits. I looked out the window and noticed the streetlights were still on, so why was my house the only one without power? The circuit breaker was in the basement. I hated that basement. It was unfinished, with exposed pipes and a low ceiling that made it feel claustrophobic. The wooden stairs creaked under my weight, and the air grew noticeably colder as I descended. I reached the bottom and swept the flashlight around. The usual clutter of paint cans and old tools greeted me. I moved toward the breaker in the far corner, near the old boiler. Then I saw it. Behind the boiler was a figure crouched low, completely still. For a moment I couldn't move. The flashlight's beam shook in my hand and my breath caught in my throat. The figure shifted slightly and the light glinted off a pair of wide, unblinking eyes. His face was pale, his clothes dark and ragged, blending into the shadows. He was close, too close. Who are you?" I managed to stammer, my voice barely sounding like my own. The man didn't answer, he just stared at me. Then, without warning, he bolted. He darted around the boiler with a speed that startled me, heading straight for the back door, which I hadn't even realized was ajar. The sound of his footsteps echoed as he disappeared into the night. I stood there frozen, the flashlight trembling in my hand. I didn't know how long I stood there before my legs finally moved. I slammed the basement door shut and locked it, leaning against it for support. My hands were shaking as I fumbled with my phone, dialing 911. The operator's calm voice made my own panic seem even more overwhelming as I explained what had happened. There was a man in my basement. He ran out through the back door. The operator assured me that officers were on their way and instructed me to stay somewhere safe. I grabbed a heavy flashlight as a makeshift weapon and sat in the corner of the living room, my eyes glued to the backyard. The minutes stretched on like hours until I finally saw the red and blue lights of a patrol car pull into the driveway. One of the officers stayed with me by the door, reassuring me as the other descended the creaky stairs. The sound of his boots echoed ominously in the silence. It wasn't long before his voice called out, "Got something?" Moments later, he re-emerged, holding a black duffel bag, its fabric dusty and worn. "Do you recognize this?" he asked. "No, that's definitely not mine." He set the bag down on the floor and unzipped it. Inside was a mess of items, electronics still in their boxes, wallets, and even a few pieces of jewelry. Seeing the contents made my breath catch. It didn't take a detective to figure out what it was. "It looks like your basement's been used as a storage spot," the officer explained. "Stolen goods, most likely stolen from the supermarket next door by the looks of it," he said, looking over the items. "This is typical for thieves. They'll stash recently stolen goods in a spot where they think it won't raise suspicion, then come back later to collect them once things cool down. But a basement? That's bold. I've never seen someone use a private residence like this. My home, my safe space, had been turned into a hiding spot for a thief. How long do you think he's been doing this?" I managed to ask. The officer shrugged. "Could be days, could be weeks, hard to say. But judging by the number of items here, he's been at it for a while." I felt like the floor beneath me was shifting. How many times had this person crept into my home? How often had I been upstairs, completely unaware that someone was moving around just below me? The second officer emerged with more evidence. A dirty blanket, an empty soda can, and a crumpled fast food wrapper. "Looks like he was spending some time down here too," he said. "He might have been using the basement as a spot to lie low between jobs." The officers finished their inspection, securing the evidence and promising to keep an eye out for anyone matching the description of the man I'd seen. They assured me they'd increased patrols in the area, but their reassurances felt hollow. The next morning, I called my landlord and he came by with a contractor. They replaced every lock on the property and sealed off the basement door with a heavy deadbolt. Motion sensor lights were installed in the backyard, and I scheduled an appointment to get a security system installed. It helped, but only a little. A few days later, one of the officers called to follow up. "We've identified some of the items in the bag," he said. "Most of it was stolen from the supermarket behind your house, but a few pieces, like the jewelry, were reported missing by customers shopping there." "Have you caught him yet?" I asked. The officer admitted that they hadn't caught him yet, but we're working on it. Cases like this aren't uncommon, but I'll be honest, it's unusual for someone to use a basement like this. Most of the time, they stash things in public places like dumpsters or abandoned buildings. Your house must have seemed like the perfect cover. The thought sent a shiver through me. How many times had I unknowingly made it easier for him, leaving the basement door unlocked, not noticing the faint smells or small signs of intrusion? I'd chalked it all up to an old house and a busy schedule. Over the next few days, I tried to go about my routine, but it was impossible. A week later, I decided I couldn't stay. The landlord was understanding, and I moved into a small apartment closer to campus with better security. It wasn't as spacious or charming, but I needed the peace of mind more than anything. The scariest part wasn't just that he'd been there, it was that I hadn't known. And if it weren't for the power outage, I might never have found out.